Hello, this is Greg Allison with Green Greg's Garden and Worm Farm, coming to you tonight with a guest, Command Sergeant Mike Mabee. Command Sergeant Mike Mabee is one of my heroes. He is an awesome individual. Command Sergeant Major Mike Mabee saved a guy in 9/11, and he took him out of one of the towers before it collapsed. But in typical fashion of Mike Mabee, he doesn't take credit for saving that guy. He says the guy saved him because that guy that needed to save him got him out of the building. So Mike is an awesome individual. Mike Mabee was a command sergeant major in the U.S. Army. We're both Army veterans. I didn't stay in like him, so I don't have as many years in the Army as he's got. But Command Sergeant Major Mike Mabee has done a lot for this country, even outside the Army. He has written this great book that I have shown a few times in some other podcasts, some other videos. It is the civil defense book. This book tells you how to prepare your community, your town, how to organize them, how to have good civil defense. It's a great plan. I've put links to it in some of my videos. I've mentioned it in some of my videos. By all means, buy it. I'll put a link in this video. There's also a link on Mike Mabee's website. He has not only done that, he's been a real strong advocate for power grid defense. He spoke at my last power grid defense conference back about a year and a half ago in August of 2018. And that's the last time I had the privilege of actually seeing him personally, although we've been on some telecons together since. Mike Mabee has been really involved in trying to show what's going on in the power industry and a lot of the weaknesses in it. He's filed a lot of Freedom of Information Act filings to try to get more transparency of what's going on in the power grid. And now Mr. Mabee has taken on a new initiative to try to get our power grid hardened and secured, because he's essentially saying that right now that the Physical Security Act, the Physical Security Standard, CIP-0142, is inadequate and it's not even enforced. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll let Command Sergeant Mike Mabee explain that for himself. Mike, tell us what.
Greg, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of your great subscribers out there about an issue of real importance to you and your family, your community, and to the country in general. I wanted to start off talking a little bit about what the electric grid actually is. We've all heard that term, electric grid, but a lot of people don't really understand what that means. So we'll talk about it a little bit. So the electric grid is everything from the generation of power to the transmission of power over long distances, to the distribution of power out to local areas and to your house. So the generation, transmission, and distribution of electric power is what we're talking about when we talk about the electric grid. Now, the electric grid is the largest machine ever built by mankind, the North American electric grid. It is a marvel of engineering, but also because it's been built over generations. You know, the electric grid is, well over 100 years old. And much of the equipment on the electric grid is also very old. The other interesting thing about the electric grid is there's no one person who controls it. It doesn't belong to one person. There are approximately 3,000 different companies, both public and private sector companies, that own or operate little pieces of it. So these 3,000 different entities across the country and Canada are actually the ones that control the electric grid. So the electric utility industry kind of together. Sorry about that. Still hear me, Greg?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's like an earthquake, but that's all right. So, ladies and gentlemen, just real quick, there's some problems.
I'll try not to do this so much with my hands. But all of these companies, the electric utility industry, are largely self-regulated, and this is part of the problem. The federal government has no authority to tell the electric grid what to do, believe it or not. So the federal government can't tell the electric grid to harden itself against certain threats. And we know about all kinds of threats to the grid. We know about, and we hear all the time about cyber attacks. There's also physical attacks, and we'll be talking about that quite a bit tonight. In addition to that, weather. Between 2010 and the end of 2019, there were over 800 different weather-related power outages in the electric grid in the United States and Canada. We also have threats from things like electromagnetic pulse, which can be caused in a couple different ways. Somebody could detonate a nuclear weapon above the United States, and that would cause a charge of power that could fry some of these big transformers that you see as you're driving down the road, and you see all those electrical wires going into all those gray boxes of equipment behind a chain link fence. So that's what's called an extra high voltage transformer. And those transformers are not even made in the United States anymore. It takes between a year to 18 months to replace one of them. Now, we've got about 2,000 large extra high voltage transformers in the United States, and then we've got tens of thousands of smaller high voltage transformers. And all of these are very, very susceptible to a large number of threats. So now you might be thinking to yourself, well, you know, somebody must be doing something about this, right? You know, there must be, you know, some regulations in place. So let me talk for a second about the regulatory regime that kind of governs this. So there are over 60 different regulators that are involved, and none of them have direct authority over the electric grid. So you've got about 50 public utility commissions in the 50 states and actually also in the territories. You have these public utility commissions, and they largely just regulate the distribution end of the electric grid. The federal government has an agency most people have never heard of called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That is the only federal agency that has any authority at all, and it only has authority over a piece of the electric grid, which is the transmission piece called the bulk power system. And their authority is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, as we all call it. FERC's authority is indirect and complicated. So they can't directly tell the electric grid to, you know, or just that portion, the transmission portion, to harden itself against something. They've got to go through a nonprofit organization known as the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. So the electric grid is largely self-regulated, and they're self-regulated by this corporation, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which we call NERC. So FERC is the federal agency that oversees NERC, which is a nonprofit corporation which is funded by the electric utility industry. Now, to make things worse, FERC does have the authority to tell NERC, we want you to write a standard about something to do with the bulk power system transmission. NERC then goes to all the companies in the industry, and they reach a consensus, and basically the industry writes its own regulation. And then NERC comes back and it gives the regulation to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who can either approve it or they can go back and say, no, we want you to work on this a little bit more. Or, you know, we have these particular things that we want you to look at. So let me give you an example. Most people have heard of the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. And that was a real monumental blackout. And here's how it started. It actually started from untrimmed foliage in Ohio, and then through a cascading bunch of human error, computer error, machine error, it caused a cascading outage of the entire northeast portion of the electric grid. 55 million people were without power, in 10 million in Canada, 45 million in the United States, all from a cascading outage that started out from untrimmed foliage in Ohio. Well, everybody lost their mind. You know, Congress is having hearings, subpoenas are flying. How can this happen? And let's make sure it doesn't happen again, yada, yada, yada. So it was decided that we needed to have a tree trimming standard. Makes sense, right? That's what caused this big, huge blackout. It took a decade. The Great Northeast Blackout of 2003 was in 2003, and the tree trimming standard went into effect in 2013. took over a decade to get that standard in place. Now, if everybody looks west towards California, where we just had rolling blackouts from Pacific Gas and Electric due to untrimmed foliage, and they had to black out their grid in order to be able to take care of this, it's obvious that that one standard for tree trimming has not been terribly effective. So the regulatory system, my friends, that regulates the electric grid, on which 327 million Americans are plugged into, and make no mistake about it, we are plugged into life support. If somebody unplugs the U.S. electric grid, everything that we need to survive and that your family needs to survive gets unplugged with it. So there are 16 critical infrastructures in the United States. The energy industry is one of those. But think about it. If the electric grid goes out for a long period of time, what you end up with is you lose your entire communication system. You lose your water and wastewater system. So we can no longer, whether you've got a well or whether you've got city water, your water goes down if the electricity goes down. If you're lucky enough to have a generator and you've got a well pump, then you'd be able to run that for a while, but at some point you're going to run out of gas. And guess what? The whole transportation industry is gone. So no new gas is coming in. Food stops coming into the grocery stores, and we've all seen what it looks like the day before the hurricane, where the shelves are picked bare and everybody runs out, before the hurricane comes and, picks the shelves bare. So all of a sudden, now we've got no food, we've got no water, our medical system collapses, every critical infrastructure collapses because of the lack of the electric grid. And then, we are stuck in a world where everything that we depend on for our very existence is gone. That's kind of the danger we face.
Yeah, what don't get mentioned, Mike, is that often really includes the ability to reestablish the electric grid.
Absolutely.
And that's what a lot of people don't realize. In that 18 months that you cited is typically the time it takes to actually get the high voltage transformer on the dock. And then how are you going to get it there when you don't have the fuel to move it? You don't have the personnel to install it. You don't have the equipment, everything driven by electricity or by petrol fuel, which is pumped by electricity. The whole supply chain unravels. And like I said, even if you could install it, you're talking 18 months at best. But how can you, if you lose if you have a cascading failure that fries these, how do you possibly hope to be able to install them all within, a short period of time? We're talking possibly, some people suggest up to 10 years to get the grid up, when the EMP task force told us that 90% of the population would be gone within a year. And I would submit they're optimistic because they were counting on the notion that farmers grew their own gardens and food, which they don't for the most part. I found that out. And they discounted the effects of our spent fuel rod pools at the nuclear power plants at that time when they made that assessment, and a host of other things. And so what I would like to mention, one thing real quick though, we got about 18 minutes probably before the Zoom account I've got will shut us off, but I'm going to have a lot more. I'll have Mike back on this channel probably many times, because we're going to have a lot to talk about in the upcoming months. And I've also got links below. You can click support my channel for buying worms and prepper supplies, which you'll need if the grid goes down. You'll need to be able to grow food in your home. So also check True Left Market. I do videos on, I have them on growing microgreens in your home. And Mr. Mike Mabee here also does aquaponics. And he has in his basement. He's all into the prepper stuff, and we can do tons of videos on so many topics that's not funny. But also for all these videos, if you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and click the update notification bell and click all there, so that you'll get all the videos coming up. Because I promised you some time back, I'm going to become a very premier channel here on Power Grid Defense, because I know a lot of people in this field from the conferences I've done, the work I've done, and we're going to really make the most out of this. But we've got some urgent action that has to be taken real soon. And so Mike is going to tell you all about that. He'll probably tell you a little bit more about that. I ask him to give some basics first, because some of you aren't as familiar yet with these topics. I also have a lot of videos on my channel talking about Power Grid Defense. They may not all show immediately in the playlist, so you can always click videos above and see them. So Mike, sorry I'll take up too much of your time. Go ahead, please resume.
Not at all. So one of the threats that we're going to talk about tonight, and I'll definitely be back, and Greg and I will talk about all these different threats to the grid. But one of them I want to talk about tonight because there is an urgent call to action, and I need your help. We have just been successful in getting the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to look at the physical security of the electric grid. So let me talk about why this is important and why presently it appears that it is absent. So I was talking about these extra high voltage transformers. Well, in 2013, there was an attack on one of these in Metcalfe, California. It was one of PG&E's transformers. And in this attack, several assailants cut the alarm wires to the transformer station, and then with precisely aimed rifle fire, were able to take out the entire transformer. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to shoot at it. They knew how to damage this. This wasn't like, you know, Billy Bob and a couple of his friends had too many beers and went out plinking. These were people that deliberately disabled and damaged this transformer, almost causing a blackout in the San Jose Valley. Now, luckily, they were able to reroute the electricity out. The FBI has never found the people that did this. About a year later, the Wall Street Journal ran a couple of articles about this, one of them saying that this really raises the possibility of terrorism. If terrorists did an attack on several key of these transformer stations, they could cause a long-term blackout in a wide area of the country. And as it turns out, so this is 2013, 2014 when these reports are coming out about this. The GAO, which is now the Government Accountability Office, it used to be called the General Accounting Office, in 1981 published a report saying that the physical security of the grid was not adequate, and that if you took out a couple of these key transformer stations, you could black out the whole country. So the federal government has known about this for 40 years, that this vulnerability exists. Well, let's fast forward. Right after Metcalfe, what happened? The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission asked NERC, the industry, you need to write a physical security standard. So they did. They wrote a physical security standard. And my present research indicates that this has been completely ineffective, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it's a hollow standard. It doesn't require too much. And you can, Greg's going to provide a link for you to click so you can read my entire complaint, and then I'm going to tell you what I need you to do. So the physical security standard does not require that regulators approve a physical security plan. All it says is you've got to do a couple of pieces of paper, and you've got to have somebody review them. It doesn't say who has to review it. It could be another utility. So PG&E could ask Nuke Energy, hey, review my papers. And all that is required is that they have something called a physical security plan and somebody unaffiliated with their company review it. Don't have to approve it. You know, there's no requirement whatsoever that it be an effective plan or that it really addresses physical security. So the standard itself does not require that companies have an effective physical security plan, and there's absolutely no regulatory approval or even a regulatory look at what the components of their physical security plan actually are. So if that's not bad enough, when the standard did go into place after Metcalfe, you would think that after congressional hearings and everything that's going on, that FERC and NERC would take a big interest in physical security. So how many times do you think this new physical security standard was cited since the Metcalfe attack? 4 times in the entire country. And those 4 violations were for administrative violations. They had nothing to do with whether there was effective physical security or not. So what we need to do at this point, and the only way we can hold the government accountable, and the only way that we can get protections in the electric grid, is if we get some citizens to take action. I'm a regular citizen just like you. So is Greg. But you know, we're people that care about the electric grid. Greg holds some great conferences where he brings together some of the best minds in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission saying that the physical security of our grid is inadequate. And what you can do if you want to help is print out a copy of this complaint and either send it, email it, or walk down to your congressman or senator's office and say, look, this is unacceptable. We need to protect the electric grid. You were elected to protect my family. That is the first job of government, is to protect the people. And what I would suggest is, if you do this, if you bring this to the attention of your representative or your senator, if they take action and they send a letter to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission saying, hey, we need you to look into this physical security situation and make sure that our grid is secure. If your representative or senator takes action that you ask them to, then remember them in the voting booth. And by the same token, if they blow you off or they don't take any action, remember them in the voting booth. This is the way that we as citizens have a little bit of power where we can help hold the government accountable. But I need to emphasize, this is a very, very important matter, and we need to get notices to intervene into this Federal Energy Regulatory Commission docket by March 2nd of this year. So time is short. We need you to immediately try to go to your representative or your senator and try to get them to send a motion to intervene into the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. If you happen to be the type of individual that likes to write your own letters as well, by all means, there is an order in the docket which tells you exactly how you can file a letter into this docket as a citizen. You have the right to also do this. What I would say, and do both by all means if you want. If you have to pick one, the most important thing is we need to get our elected officials into this docket asking FERC to look into the physical security of the electric grid.
Okay, Mike, let me show, I'm going to share your website on here. Give me a
Sure.
minute to pull it up. And I'll have a link to this website. And this is Mike Mabee's website. And he's got a lot of good resources on here. And it starts out with this complaint filed about inadequate electric grid physical security. And so you can go through here and see all of his links, the notice about the FERC. And let's see here. Click here for the complaint. It says click here for the FERC notice. You can go through here, and also there's a lot of resources, a lot of details over here in his news section. Please check that out. Check out, he's got his library. There's just so much resources here on his site. Fund the fight. You can help him take action. Now, see, this is what I like, a website that tells you what you can do to help save our country. And you can have an active role in providing defense for yourself, your family, so that we can continue to have a prosperous future. You have a motto on my channel here, Mike, that my objective is to help my subscribers to be able to survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive. And
Right.
So it's not just surviving, but thriving. And having a power grid that works is one of the key components to that.
Absolutely.
But staying out of the hive is a whole different topic. But that has to do with our freedoms, which a lot of people think that we ought to take away from us. So there's a lot of things on here you can go into. See, look here. It says, take action, secure the grid. He talks to us about the Secure the Grid Coalition that we're both members of, that has regular telecons. Then it goes in here and he tells you some of the things to do, first and second. So, Mike, you want to say anything to this while I'm scrolling through it? Any particular place you want me to point to real fast?
Yeah, one thing you could point to, Greg, is if you go to the library, the federal government, I've got, this is believed to be the largest collection of government documents
Right here.
on security. So if you're looking for resources that talk about the threats to the electric grid, all of the congressional hearings, the GAO reports, there are decades and decades. I go all the way back to 1962 when they discovered the electromagnetic pulse phenomenon. These are all federal documents, and now I'm putting some state documents. They're all government documents about security of the electric grid. So that's a great resource that you can use if you want to do research yourself, or if you want to show other people that, look, I'm not crazy. there are these threats to the grid, and the federal government has known about these for decades. So a lot of people ask, and I'm sure, Greg, one of the questions people have in their mind right now is, well, why doesn't the government do anything? They've known about this for decades. Well, let me tell you something, my friends. The electric utility industry in 2018 spent $147 million lobbying Congress and making donations to members of Congress that are on key committees that oversee the electric grid. So we've had several pieces of grid protection legislation that died in committee, and those same committee members took big contributions from the electric utility industry. So some of our elected officials seem to find it very difficult to do the right thing when they're getting big checks from the electric utility industry. That is part of the problem, and that's where we need to come in as citizens and hold our elected officials accountable.
And I talked about that in the video I called How Our Government is Really Run. And I talked about how these politicians are really just looking for the funds to get them reelected, and how they're in bed with these regulatory committees that are also in bed with the organizations are supposed to be regulating. They have a revolving door between them, and our interest as citizens is not their interest. And that's why we have to take action and remind them, oh yeah, we are in charge of this country, at least for now, and we need to be active to maintain that control, or we're going to lose it. It's going to slip through our fingers. If we wind up being a tyranny, like some people would like to take us into without having any freedoms, look out, folks. It's not going to be the ferry ride you're expecting. It's going to be worse than you can imagine. It's going to be a nightmare. So.
And one citizen can do a great deal. So you look at me and Greg. We're elbow deep in this thing right now, and we're two just regular citizens, just like you, who just want to make sure that we protect our families and we protect our neighbors.
We just care. We care. We see a problem and we want to do something about it, and we know that we can, and so can you. You can take these steps that Mike suggested. You can take his complaint, take it to your local congressman, take it to your state elected representatives, your state House member, your state senator, your federal senator, your federal congressman. Push all of them, because they all have a finger in this pie.
Absolutely.
So we got probably about 3 minutes. We don't have long, and I think this session may be terminated because there's my version of Zoom only allows for 45 minutes. We consumed some of that before we started the recorded session. So what would you like to say most in closing, Mike?
I would like to say that you've got to take action. You cannot be complacent. Right now, we are in grave danger because our electric grid is largely unprotected, and particularly we've got an opportunity right now on the physical security of the electric grid. So if what Greg and I have been talking about tonight concerns you, please take action. Do something.
Do something. Exactly. Be the change you want to be. And this is how you can start it right here, right now. You are capable of helping us maintain a better future for humanity, for our country, for our communities, for your family. And do it for your family, if nothing else. That's the main thing. Your friends, your family, your loved ones. We all have these people in our lives, so let's do everything we can. Don't throw up your hands and say, oh, well, they this, they that. We are the they. They is us, and it's up to us to do something. So be the change you want to see. Go out and take action to maintain our country, our freedom, our liberty, and our power grid. Because the power grid is the linchpin. Everything depends on our power grid. All these other infrastructures, those 16 infrastructure items that we all consider so critical, they all depend on electric power, every one of them. This is the key thing, and it's too easy to take out. And he mentioned also physical attacks, like done on the Metcalf station. Yeah, we are very vulnerable to physical attacks. I mentioned some of my videos that had been identified that maybe as little as 9 critical substations could take down an entire grid, and you could have these cascading failures. And these cascading failures could fry these high voltage transformers. The big ones are 200 to 400 tons, or as big as a house. You're not going to replace those easily at all. So, my friends, take action. You can do something. Do it. Do it. Do it now. And go to Mike Mabee's website. I'll have links below, and we'll do more of this in the future. So, Mike, I'm one to end the recorded session, and we can chat for a minute until Zoom times us out. So you have a closing word, Mike?
What's that?
Do you have any closing word?
No, I just, take action and do something. And Greg said it perfectly. Do it for your family, if nothing else.
Yes, amen. So I want to thank my audience for watching, my subscribers. I have a great bunch of subscribers. We're forming a community, Mike. And I'm going to try, I'm emphasizing the formation of communities, survival communities and tribes around the country. And I'm already taking some action in that area. And so your book is a great resource for that. Everybody check out Mike Mabee's book, buy it. Thanks, Mike. And thank everyone for watching.